Recording in progress. You hear me okay, Marie? Oh, I haven't heard you yet. That's on me though. That's not you, it's me.
No, that's okay. I know I unmuted. It's okay.
Okay, here we go.
Are you on YouTube?
Marie, say one more thing.
Hello.
Got it. Thank you.
Are you on YouTube?
Right there. That was nice. That was
Wonderful.
Take care, friends.
And it went right with what,
All right, let's do this thing.
Did you go live on YouTube? It says.
It was, thank you. I'm just having to record today and I'll upload it later because it was not behaving in a professional manner.
Okay.
All right, let's do this thing. If somebody would lead us in the opening prayer as printed in the bulletin, that would be delightful. Thank you, Frank.
Let us pray. God of all wisdom and clarity, as we gather today, we ask for your Spirit's presence. Equip us with humble hearts and discerning minds, enabling us to see beyond words to the motives and movements behind them. Guide us away from fear and towards courageous faithfulness, that we may serve you and our neighbors with genuine integrity. Help us navigate challenging realities, always seeking your kingdom first. Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, for our one-word check-in, we're going to go around. We're going to start with Roxanne in the back. Share your name and one word describing your initial emotional reaction to the reading. And we're going to work our way all the way to the front and then to you, Marie. Roxanne.
Okay. And I would say,
I'm Leon Schmidt. I would say fear.
I'm Diane Rogers, and unfortunately didn't do the reading,
It's okay.
but from what I've heard from people, I probably would not have been unhappy. with the result of the
Go ahead, Carolyn. Yeah, what's one word that, if you did the reading, what would be one word that came to mind? Anxiety, great.
David Cook. Enlightened.
Enlightened, okay.
Joan Cook, mad.
Mad, okay.
Frank Atkins, boring.
Boring, okay. Marie?
Marie Baker, curious.
Curious. Good. All right. We'll let all of that kind of prime the pump a little bit. I want to say that I needed to readjust our schedule. So last weekend, I canceled our class so that Leon, can I ask a favor? Did you mind putting down that window? I wanted to hold off, not I'll just wait a second. It's cool. It's cool.
You know, think
It's all gone? Or pasted.
Okay, there we go.
So we're on number 2.
I didn't want us to lose lose out on not debriefing what I had planned for us last weekend. And so I simply readjusted the schedule. The printed copy that you have in front of you, I had printed last week before I canceled the class. So those dates are not great. I just didn't want to waste paper.
That's fine.
So what I emailed you is the most up to date. That's okay. Okay. So that reflects our readjustment of the schedule with last week's class being canceled. And then also on the 10th of August, which is Women's Leadership Sunday, that I've canceled that one day as well. So we're going to go all the way to Labor Day weekend, and navigating through this so we have time to make sure that we digest fully everything that we're encountering. I myself am still trying to find my own footing on how we go through this book. There is a lot of good content that's in the book, and there's also a lot of good content outside of it that I want to bring into our conversation. I'm probably going to do a little bit more of that today and next week. And I'll give you a preview of that when we get to it here shortly. Only because I think, as today's title is called, the foundation of the movement, I want us to try to make sure that we all have some common ground and some common understanding. Last week, or 2 weeks ago when we met, we noticed that there was some misperceptions about, well, what is this Christian nationalism? And how does it differ? And I want to make sure that we have some better understanding of all that, so that we can again kind of have some common ground. Each week I will strive to include both, for your own reference, both a citation from Scripture and a citation from the Book of Confessions. Those aren't necessarily something that we will cover, but in the handout, I want to be able to connect what we're doing specifically with the Bible or the Book of Confessions. For those of you who may be new to the Presbyterian faith, our denomination, Presbyterian Church USA, has a two-part Constitution. Part one of the Constitution is the Book of Confessions. Part two is the Book of Order. And at least for this, I want to strive to try to highlight some of those confessions as they apply appropriately when we go through the material. A lot of the confessions in the Book of Confessions are ones that you may not be familiar with. In worship today, and that we're going to use for the next couple of months, are highlights from the Confession of 1967. That may sound very unfamiliar to you, and that's okay. You may be familiar with one of the other confessions, which is the Apostles' Creed, is one of the confessions in our Book of Confessions. I have been doing some highlights from in the previous months in worship from a brief statement of faith, which, if you go to actually read it, it is not very brief. But it really is brief, but I just don't have time to get into why it is brief, even though when you read it, it's not brief. Today's citation is from the Confession of Belhar, and two interesting things about the Confession of Belhar. It is the last confession that was added here. John, would you take this back over to you? Here, please. The Confession of Belhar was the last confession that was added to our Book of Confessions. And it was written in the mid to late 80s in response to apartheid South Africa. It is the only confession that we have from the global South. And so I've included a citation from that. If you want more information on the Book of Confession, one, I'm happy to send you a PDF copy, or two, I can point you to some resources that can help you better understand the Book of Confessions. That's not really what I'm hoping to do in this class, but I want to try to make sure that you have exposure to some of these foundational documents, foundational sources that that I think are important to the theology of our faith tradition. Our primary source that we're reading from is The Power Worshippers by Catherine Stewart. We'll be hitting this. There's a reading lineup, a reading schedule for you in that handout. Again, what I email you is the most up to date. And this is the primary source that we're going to use. I did bring show and tell on some other things that I want to go over today. One is this is a book from, there you go, Marie. The Religious History of America by Edwin Gestald and Leon Schmidt. I've given you the citations in there so you can look it up. This is for my own personal growth, development, and understanding of American Christianity and movement, this became a primary source for me. And so if I have long thought for the last 4 years, I would love to teach a Sunday school class on this book alone, just the movement of American Christianity, and follow through this book. I might get to it eventually, but I think that's a fantastic book. I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. Another one that I've put in there is called The Bible in American Life. And it is a reader. It is a collection of various different essays and whatnot inside of it. It is a good complementary reader about religion in America. And then finally, this book called The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion by Jonathan Haidt. And you got to put that D in there, Haidt. It's got get your tongue involved in that. And this too is another one that I could have built a Christian nationalism class around this book alone also. And I debated between The Power Worshippers and this one, and I chose The Power Worshippers as our primary focus, but this would have been a great alternative for us to explore. I want to pull out in your handout there on page 6 of the printed copy that I gave you, and I think it's the same for the digital copy. I want to pull out some citations from The Religious History of America, the Gestald and Schmidt book. And specifically on that page 6, at the top there, I've highlighted in yellow, they write, with millions of new immigrants and dozens of new ethnic tensions with concerns about both race and gender, many worried in the late 19th century about the oneness of the nation. All this difference made Americanization the great cause of many native-born whites. To take all that foreignness and language, custom, dress, and religion, and somehow to melt it all down into a familiar, domesticated, English-speaking American. The religion of such an American would preferably be Protestant, at least Bible-believing, and informed by a moral code that could be seen as essentially biblical. Public schools would serve as a major instrument of the Americanization process. So I highlighted this in part because we are seeing that at least one element that they're highlighting is a formal movement in the 1800s and in the 19th century about Americanizing life in the United States, and especially Native Americans, Hispanic Americans, and any other non-white, non-Caucasian people. So one of the ways in which this would be accomplished is as a Protestant group would move into a particular area, Texas, the Protestant group would form boarding schools. And in that, as they rounded up Native Americans, they would place their children in these boarding schools as a way to help them. Does this make sense what I'm saying? And really the goal of this was to, in modern day terms, to indoctrinate them, right? To Americanize those who are not like us. It is in that place, in this boarding school and also through public school, that in these places where we would have a exposure to a particular view of American life. And this movement is not something that was just in the southern United States. It was something that was in the northern United States too, although there may be some differences on what Americanization looks like in the southern United States, especially on the backside of Civil War. So the movement of that during, let's say, the pre-Civil War time, so let's say 1830s to the 1860s, in the global South would have, in the southern United States, would have made justifications in the education process for the divine righteousness of slavery, which we would have taught in school, and so on and so on. In the Presbyterian Church, and I included this in some of my dissertation research, the Presbyterian Church, as it came into Texas, and specifically into South Texas along the valley, it had a department of Americanization, Christian education department focused on implementing Americanization through its Sunday school and public school. We would train our Christian educators on how to Americanize our education for those non-white persons. All of this to say, that is something only in the last 15 years or so that our denomination has recognized and since apologized for. That has, as you can imagine, led to generational impact of disgust, of rejection of Christianity by persons who were either forced to go to those boarding schools, or in some cases where that Americanization process took place on a Sunday morning, also led to a generational aspect of conflating American patriotism with Christianity. Does this make sense? The other point before I move on to the next quote here that I want to highlight is simply that public schools would serve as a major instrument of the Americanization process. And I want us next week, what I hope to accomplish this coming week, is that next Sunday, I want to unpack what that sentence looks like here in the state of Texas today. I started research on that at the beginning of this week. I wasn't ready to present it today. I hope to have more of what that looks like next Sunday, not only in the state of Texas, but also in the state of Oklahoma. Because it ought to shock your pants off. That second paragraph on that page, and Carla, we're on page 6, if you got the handout. The second paragraph about President William McKinley, an earnest Methodist, gave a religious spin to the public debate when he declared through prayer, you can take that stack back there with you in case anybody else comes in. Gave an earnest religious spin to a public debate when he declared that through prayer, he came to see that it was the nation's duty to uplift and civilize and Christianize the Filipinos, and by God's grace, do the very best we could by them as our fellow men for whom Christ also died. But many church leaders needed a little encouragement to see the American victory as an opportunity to spread American Protestantism to an ignorant and deluded people, whether in the Pacific or in the Atlantic. highlighted this in the sense that, again, we are seeing that this Americanization, Protestant Americanization doctrine dogma is not something that is contained to the continental United States, but then became also what we did with our missionaries as we sent them out, or our military government as we sent out and engaged in wars. My great-grandparents were Presbyterian missionaries to Hainan, China, which is in the South Pacific Sea, 105 years ago. They arrived in 1919, and their 4 boys and 1 daughter, the 1 daughter was my grandmother, were there to spread Christianity from this perspective of Midwest Protestant perspective Americanization. Hainan, China had no desire to have American Christians up in their business. And about a decade ago, or less than a decade ago, I was given the gift of my great-grandmother's handwritten journal from 20 years, of those 20 years they spent there. And she documents about how her fellow missionaries would be kidnapped in the middle of the night, and then they would find them murdered on the trails in this very untamed area. And so part of what I've thought about is, what did evangelism and mission work and this Americanization, Christian education doctrine look like now 100 years apart? If I were to go to Hainan, China today, where my family is, in what ways is the reception of Christianity the same or different, and the approach of evangelizing mission work be the same or different 100 years apart? And let me tell you, it's very different. But the idea was not something that was contained just to the continental United States. The next paragraph there. As a movement, it has generated this idea of the Christian right has generated high hopes for the redemption of the United States as a Christian nation. This is a post-1960s legacy. And at the same time has provoked soaring fears of theocratic intolerance. This is now talking about, Gestalt is now talking about the rise of the moral majority, the Christian voice, the religious roundtable. These groups shared similar, if not identical, agendas. They also shared ties with the political right. I think I have a typo there. But nationally and at the local level, they united in promoting prayer, public schools, and opposing abortion, and condemning homosexuality, and despairing over the growth of secular humanism, and supporting at least equal time of the teaching of creationism, and in promoting whatever way possible a return to Christian America. So we see in the 1970s this really institutionalized, ingrained movement of the religious right through these various foundations that still exist today, beginning to engage in the mechanisms of power so that it might accomplish their goals, which they united and rallied behind, that I just mentioned just now. Yes, sir.
So on that last paragraph, when it talks about the groups, the one that stands out to me, the moral majority led by Jerry Falwell.
Yes.
So a lot of these groups that have taken this movement and lambasted us with it can't even live up to their own judgments.
Well, that's for a discussion for another day. No, I mean absolutely, right?
Well, it's a great example.
Absolutely. I mean, Jimmy Swaggart, who just recently died, also being another great example,
Yes.
right? So when we pedestalize particular evangelicals, the higher we build their pedestal, the much greater the fall. Yeah. And we have that documented time and time and time again. Power corrupts, absolutely, and absolute power corrupts. The next 2 things that I want to, and I'm only going to try to run through these really briefly. Specifically on page 7, this is under God, the Pledge of Allegiance, 1954.
Oh.
Now I've given you a hyperlink back in, and we're going to turn back in a minute, but there's a PBS series called God in America. I can't commend it enough for you to go and watch. I've included some, today I've just included a couple of summary paragraphs and the transcript of one portion of God Under America. In this episode, Under God and the Pledge of Allegiance, we have this note here. Religion became, so let me just read the paragraph. In the religious resurgence that followed World War II, America faced off against its former ally, the Soviet Union, in the Cold War against godless communism. Religion became increasingly prominent in the nation's life. As historians Paul Harvey and Philip Goff being my book that I recommend, Bible and American Life, that I put down in the research, in the resources, Philip Goff have noted, the high priest of America's civil religion was Dwight D. Eisenhower, former commander of Allied forces in Europe. Eisenhower himself was not baptized until after his election. He became Presbyterian, but he urged his countrymen to attend church without specifying any particular denomination. Democracy, he explained, is the political expression of a deeply felt religion. At the urging of the Knights of Columbus, a Catholic lay group, Eisenhower added the words "under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance. The marriage of religion and politics during the Eisenhower era gave renewed impetus to the tendency to equate American goals with God's purpose. So, thanks, Presbyterians. I think I don't know how many of y'all may or may not have known that, but the idea that under God is only 75 years old. One nation under God and our Pledge of Allegiance is a relatively, we're talking about a 250-year country. This is a relatively new idea. And it's not only that we put under God in the Pledge of Allegiance, this is also where we add to our money "in God we trust." These didn't exist prior to Eisenhower. These are ideas that have been added since then. If you look at the dialogue, the transcript that I've included on pages 8 and 9, it talks a little bit more about Eisenhower, and you can read that at your own leisure, and his movement. If you look on page 10 of 10, which is the last page of the handout, you'll see again some ways in which that this documentary called God in America also is reflected under Reagan and under Barack Obama. And I highlighted these two particular paragraphs. See if you can hear the contrast between Reagan and Obama. Under Reagan, elected to presidency in 1980 with overwhelming support, Reagan addressed the National Association of Evangelicals in 83, saying, became known as the evil. Most of the address was concerned with the place of religion and morality in public life. In his speech, he links secularism to government-sponsored birth control and abortion. He applauds a constitutional amendment to restore prayer in public school. He nods briefly to the success of civil rights movement and proceeds to discuss the nuclear freeze, all in religious language in which American history is cloaked in a sacred mantle and the cause of freedom as its sacred mission. Contrasting that to 30 years later with presidency of Obama, who delivered an address at a conference convened by Jim Wallace, progressive evangelical. Obama says secularists are wrong when they ask believers to leave their religion at the door before entering the public square. The great reformers in American history, Frederick Douglass, Abraham Lincoln, Dorothy Day, were motivated by faith and used religious language to argue for their cause. Turning to the religious right, he reminded them that the great principle of separation of church and state had allowed religion to flourish. Obama also argued that religiously inspired policies must be argued in universal terms, subject to argument, amenable to reason. Part of what we have there is a focused perspective of the rejection of non-Protestant Christian ideology that is not in alignment with who we are. The secularists are wrong, and we need to have this merging of religion and patriotism. And what I understand from Obama, what he's arguing is that we cannot check. Secularism might want you to check your religion at the door. It is not something that I can check at the door, that any one of us can check at the door, but it is also something to recognize that all of us who bring our faith traditions into this come from different perspectives. And it is that multiple religious perspective, Christian, Protestant Christian, Catholic Christian, Hindu, Muslim, atheist, it is all of that as it is engaging into the mechanisms of our society that create this beautiful melting pot that we are. And that diversity is not something to be shunned or rejected and unilaterally elevated above Christianity above everything else, but that the diversity, the pluralism, is something that is part of what makes the United States great, especially under that First Amendment, the separation of church and state. Separation of church and state does not mean checking your faith at the door. It just means we're not wielding the government as an instrument to tell you how to practice your faith. Make sense? I just slammed through a lot of information, and I know this, and I'm only doing it now. I'm going to turn back to page 4 of your handout, only because as I can encounter other source material, I want to make sure to bring it in. And I think one of the last points I'm going to make about this historical look of Christian nationalism from the 1950s to present day is just how anxious this country was following Eisenhower as we've entered into this Cold War, and we are now embracing this evangelical Protestant movement, right? And kind of merging of the two of the movement of America is the movement of Christ, and making this Christian nation, Protestant Christian nation, really, I think, helps us to underscore the anxieties of the presidential campaign of Kennedy, the Catholic. We'd never had a Catholic before, right? And why would we have anxieties about having a Catholic as a president? What? Because then we'll be ruled from Rome, right? And being ruled from Rome, right? If the president takes his orders from the Pope, then he's not taking it from the Protestant evangelical movement. Now, fast forward 50 years, and where might we have some of those same concerns? Maybe not with the Catholic Church anymore. There was much in the 1970s and the 80s where we began to find a lot of common alignment with the Protestant Church and the Catholic Church, especially with shared ideological perspectives or shared goals, such as abortion, homosexuality, and the like. But in the last 25 years, unlike or similar to how there was this anxiety about having a Catholic, what religious anxieties might we have witnessed in the last 25 years?
That's not religious. It was more racial.
Well, yes, racial. Yes, I'm not going to discount that.
So when Obama was running for president, it was very similar to the Kennedy deal, except it was because he was Black.
Right.
But veiled in what? It was potentially very much, it was, and I don't want to say it was or wasn't, but potentially very much was based on racism. but veiled in progressive liberation theology.
Yeah.
So he attended a church in Chicago whose pastor was named Jeremiah Wright, right? And an associate pastor of that church was Otis Moss III. And part of the conservative evangelical concern was this wayward, inappropriate, wrong, liberal progressive liberation theology that he might have been subjected to that would unravel the work of the moral majority from the previous 30 years, et cetera, et cetera. But also, John, who was it? Was it John McCain or was it Kerry? I can't remember. Who had, oh man, I just forgot his name. Joe Lieberman was running as the vice president for Kerry? Is it Kerry?
Yes.
Yeah, in 2004. And the first person on a prominent ticket who was Jewish,
Yes.
right? And then you've had other folks who have either right, how upset were the Protestant Christian nationalist nation when we began having our first Muslim in a post 9/11 world who was elected to Congress, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these anxieties that we've seen reflected over the last 25 years reflect an idea of they ain't like this Americanization, Protestant evangelical movement that we have been trying to accomplish for the last how many years? Almost 150 years. Yeah, Frank.
So similar to when Ronald Reagan was president, except he was their golden child, so they didn't really pick on him, but they got after Nancy because of her mysticism.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not like us, right?
Yeah.
It is not fitting. You're not fitting within the frame that we're giving you to fit in. And with that power, right? That power comes with a lot of money. It comes with a lot of money. And that money given to your campaign is what enables you to run big, expensive commercials and da 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 da. But to get that money, you need to fit a mold. So we saw, again, pre-Trump, up until the last election of Obama, we saw multiple presidential cycles of the Republican presidential candidates would have to go through this submission to an ideological document that they would have to sign and agree to. And if you remember, even during Trump's first presidential run, there was only one person who wouldn't subscribe to that, and that was Chris Christie. And he got eviscerated because he wouldn't subscribe to this rigid ideological dogma, which, to his credit, isn't really in line with the idea of Americanism, of American separation of church and state. But for what the power of Christian nationalism had amassed by that point, you begin to see the sizable influence they have over controlling who kowtows to, who is going to be on the receiving end of that kind of support and that kind of financial support. The most current movement, and I'll try to get off the soapbox here for a moment. The most current movement that we have heard over the last 5 years has been the work towards ending the Johnson Amendment. If you are familiar with the Johnson Amendment, this was back in the 60s before he was president, before he became president, when he was still a senator. The idea that no charitable nonprofit or center of worship, this is basically no charitable nonprofit, which is what we are, can endorse a political candidate, or that's one, can endorse a political candidate. And I want to say the other part of that is cannot contribute money towards a particular candidate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it was laundering through the church.
Yeah.
Correct. Well, let's go back to Kennedy. Okay. And let's look at the power of the evangelical right that that wields pastors in the pulpit to tell their followers who to vote for. So the same concerns that we had about being ruled by a pope in Rome, we have those. The Johnson Amendment protects us from being able to say, well, I'm your pastor, Frank, and I'm telling you, God has told me to tell you that to vote for Abbott. And I'm telling you that if you don't vote for Abbott, you're voting against God.
Yeah.
Now that is a lot of power that churches ascribe to their spiritual leaders. And maybe it's not as much power on the smaller scale. When we look at the explosion of mega churches over the last 35 years, especially in the South, that is a significant amount of power. And violating the Johnson Amendment, then what? But you know what happens if I were to say from the pulpit,
You lose your tax exempt
you
status.
lose your tax exempt status. Yeah. So that being said, that's a little bit, I think one of the things now pivoting to power worshipers. And I want us to try to just in the time that we have, just kind of debrief some of our observations and takeaways from what you encountered already. I want to lead us off by saying that she does talk a little bit about clarifying some of the distinctions between evangelicals and Christian nationalists. Does that make sense? There are absolutely Christian evangelicals whose purpose, who may, I don't have time to do an hour on evangelicals, but the idea of Christian evangelicals is the inerrant word of God that the Bible tells you is factual in the King word for word in the King James Version, and it is a more of a punitive style, very restrictive, and as we might hear it, very theologically conservative. Okay, but that doesn't necessarily make them Christian nationalists. When we're looking at the political spectrum, we have conservatives and what some may say even contemporarily MAGA conservatives. All right, these are people that the institutions of our government traditionally have been small government, less regulation, and pro-capitalism. It is the merging of the conservatism and even the MAGA conservatives with evangelicals and evangelicalism. It's the merging of those, the marrying of those is where we see that Venn diagram come together of finding Christian nationalists. Does that make sense? And in that way, in that Christian nationalist overlap is that as we are, and it's not a small overlap, it's a big overlap. We are a Christian nation, and the way in which we structure ourselves systematically is to be representative of that King James, dogmatic version of the Bible that is more punitive, more restrictive, and tackles on all of these social cultural concerns that are abhorrent to God or an abomination to God and God's plan, God's kingdom. Okay, that's some debriefing. Let's run through and talk through and ask questions. John.
So I haven't really studied it yet, but I read an article about this commission that Trump has formed. I think it's called the Religious Justice Commission.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like 22 different faiths. And the only ones that appear to be not included were Protestant.
Or Protestant or
maybe it was Presbyterian.
No, what's it called?
Progressive.
I have to look it up.
I think you're thinking maybe
Progressive.
not progressive.
It had, no, it wasn't progressive. It didn't have progressive or conservative Protestants on it. And I may, again, I didn't get to study it, I just read it a couple days ago. But that,
What's the name of
Yes.
Trump's religious task? force?
yeah, so it has Muslims on it, but two of them are white and they're US Muslims.
But, there you go.
And so it's very clearly selected. It has all the evangelicals on it, but it kind of captures what you were just talking about is it's merging these all together. And as far as I read it, they purposely left off
Like-
Protestant or Presbyterian.
Okay.
Frank?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Frank?
So Google says Donald Trump has established a task force called the Task Force to Eradicate Anti-Christian Bias. The task force mission is to immediately halt all forms of anti-Christian targeting and discrimination in the federal government. According to Trump's statement at the National Prayer Breakfast on February 6, 2025, he also announced that it will be oh my God, it's going to be headed by Attorney General Pam Bondi.
So let me do this, y'all.
Yeah.
Hang on. Let me, that's great. I'll read up on it this week and
I'll find it out.
and see if you can find the article, send it to me. And it might dovetail into some of the work we're continuing to do. Carolyn?
Tragedy of the children drowning in people, in eastern part of the state. And at first, when I realized that, I could find, the president and his wife are going about, I hope he doesn't make such a show
Politicalized.
of himself,
Yes.
of himself. No, it didn't look like basically he behaved himself, but I just kind of feel Lord is children, it's not pleasant.
Yeah, thanks. Frank?
I think probably one of the reasons I said that this past week's reading was boring is because when I got to the first chapter and they were in Unionville and we were talking about that, I felt guilty because in the late 70s and early 80s, when this movement had picked up with Ronald Reagan and all that, we at that time sat there with our mouth shut, even though we knew that wasn't right. And we kept thinking to ourselves, oh, this is just a fad, it's gonna pass, but it didn't. And so I feel bad because maybe if we opened our mouths then, it wouldn't be as bad as it is.
It would just have.
So, I appreciate that. I really do. And I want to unburden you by saying something y'all have heard me say before. There's no room for shame, blame, guilt, remorse, regret, shoulda, coulda, wouldas in the Christian faith. So there's today, and then there are the days that follow today. And so we can recognize in the areas in the past where we could have, we can recognize things from the past, but today's the day the Lord has made. So I would not want any of us to live and be saddled with those burdens there. There's plenty of things that I'm sure that folks who live, pastors, and I think about pastors in particular, who lived through the 60s, who may have got it to the 70s and realized they found themselves on the wrong side of history. It's okay. You know what? It's okay. You know what? It was a new day. And there's no future, as Desmond Tutu says, there's no future without forgiveness. And forgiveness for ourselves, forgiveness for others. And so we do honest work, we heal from it, we learn from it, and we turn forward and go forward. From our readings this week, the introduction, chapter 1, chapter 2, what are some of the things that that you were reading that you feel has made you feel particularly uneasy, or how did these chapters challenge your previous understandings of religion and politics? Roxanne, then Dave.
The things when I was reading through, especially where they were talking about that convention at Unionville, was how everything was so negative. There's sulfur and rage and, taking the Bible out of school and abortion on demand, everything was evil and, and that kind of stuff. Or I didn't see any love at all.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I think you're saying, what I hear you saying is that compassion seemed to have taken the back seat. Good. Dave?
The reason I said, my single word was enlightening is because, since I was a youngster first attending church, I guess I came to recognize that there was this far right evangelical right, and that I always looked at it as kind of a fringe movement, right? That the loudest voices come from the fringe and don't necessarily represent the vast majority of people's beliefs. And in reading this book, and previously, if somebody said, well, there are people that are on that bend who probably are donating money to their particular causes. But in reading this book, I didn't realize that there are certain individuals or organizations that are spending bazillion dollars. And that this is a movement that has attained a life of its own. That it isn't just somebody doing political donations. These are people who have a particular cause and have become very organized in the way they're doing it. And that, I think, scary, I think shock, all of those are good words for me as well, because I didn't realize just how organized it is and how much money is flowing into this.
Yeah, I think when I hit that part that you're reflecting, that part of enlightenment, the aha, I think the word that came to my mind was insidious.
Yes.
That was the word that came to my mind because we're talking about incredible organization and planting people in positions of power over decades. And when you hear someone like Kentucky Senator Mitch McConnell, who said it's my life goal to pack the courts with conservative justices, this is a part of the movement, right? And when you see, I'll find the citation of another documentary that talks about the family.
Yeah.
And the family is code for Christian nationalists who are an incredibly well-oiled machine working behind the scenes. Yeah, Joan?
It hits I'm mad because now that I see what's going on, it's the naivety that I've had and not seeing what's happening. And that's the part that just astounds me. Because the words they say, they're good words. They sound good. That's a God and country. Yes, that's what, of course, I was born in 51, so you understand where all that's coming from. And my family was definitely conservative Republicans. I was president of the Republican Organization of Women in Castro County. Now I'm going, what was I thinking?
And Joan, let me respond to you and say that I would say that again, to unburden what I think many conservatives and Republicans have identified is while they stood still, the Christian nationalist movement they moved the needle. So where you might have been political right, and Joan stood in one spot, this Christian nationalist moved the right side of that boundary further and further to the point where you either A, were a moderate and not good anymore, or they moved it where you're no longer, you're still you just moved the middle. The middle's been moved. and it could be that there are a lot of folks who experience that. Joan and I, we joke all the time. We're both from the Panhandle. I was born and raised in a Republican family, still so. And I was super excited when W became the president of Texas, governor of Texas. And then I married this beautiful woman who's Texas Democrat, and I had to switch. But that being said, I think that your idea of getting left behind, the right people on the right getting left behind. So your Republican classic, right, are excommunicated from this movement, are so far from this Christian nationalist movement that they become pariah within their own party.
Yes.
And I think we see a lot of that. But then that's also just the strength and the power that has been orchestrated that controls the levers and the mechanisms of politicians and whatnot. John,
So
I'm going to take one more after John.
If you haven't read about this guy, I think his first name is Mike, but last name is Dunn. And this guy has made billions of dollars in the Christian faith. And he actually said, so he bankrolled Abbott, Ken Paxton, and Dan Patrick, to the extent where during the impeachment, whatever it was, $3 million to Dan Patrick, and they shut that all down. But this guy said, the only people that should be in the Texas legislature are white Christian males.
Yeah.
Actually said that, and he's building a complex, a Christian complex with kids out in West Texas somewhere. I don't know exactly where it is, but he's got billions of dollars, made all this money in the oil industry, and he's bankrolling all these politicians. Abbott, Paxton, and so it's. But the other thing that was comforting, I've also read an article about it. Kind of what we're talking about is they're still kind of the thing. I mean, it's not. They have a lot of power, but hopefully they can be.
Yeah, well, I think well, that's not our call today. But I think part of what you see in the last 2 weeks of the dissension between MAGA Republicans and Republican Classic is someone like Elon Musk saying we're supposed to be conservative, fiscal conservatives, right? And now, however hypocritical that may or may not be, I'm just saying that's what the man's saying. So we need another party, Republican light, right, or Republican Classic, and is what I'm calling it, right? The MAGA Republican is its own party, and that's what GOP has become, and that's a story for another day. Let me. I want to preview. I'm going to try to preview a little what I want to try to bring next Sunday. Did you have something, Natalie?
Oh, just briefly, this
Please.
feels to me.
Thank you. Right.
Like it's actually very old. It goes, I think about the Medici popes and things like that.
Yeah.
So religion is very powerful, as it should be in people's lives. And it's been used and abused throughout the millennia before Christianity, as a source of power. And so I think what these folks have realized is, hey, if we want political power, let's tie it tightly, inextricably with religion, and not having God be mad at you and your ability to make it to heaven. And make sure that we tie that. And I think it's probably mostly cynical at the level of absolute power. But when you get a couple levels down, people want to go to heaven. They want their kids to live. They don't want to be on the other side of God. And they're being told
This is how you do it.
That's what it is.
So I would say that yes, all of that, and at its fundamental, that was not what we wanted to do 250 years ago, right? That's what we wanted to not do.
Exactly.
So when we look at, a great example of that is the Roman Empire, and I don't know why my brain's drawing a blank right now. The Roman Empire, a pagan empire all throughout the Mediterranean, and beyond. Because becomes a Christian nation, a Christian empire, because that's the thing,
Yeah.
had a dream and woke up the next day and said, you know what? Put crosses on everything. We're all in on this thing, right? And a victory ensued. He got baptized on his deathbed, except whether he believed it or not, didn't matter. I'm just saying that became the day of transition and getting away from. You look at religion in the United Kingdom and England and the UK Empire, the British Empire. You also see this this wielding of faith and religion, right, being sanctioned by God to do the things that we're doing, the colonialism, the expansion, the slavery, etc. And we said, you know what, we don't want to do this. And so we came to do our own thing apart from that. And perhaps maybe it's a part of sin, humankind's original sin, that power is good, it tastes good. And we want what we want, and I want it now. Like I said this before, it's like, Adam, and Eve saw the tree and said, I want to make an apple pie, because it tastes good and it makes me feel good. And that is this work that internally and privately and communally we try to overcome. But as you were noting, we have drawn more to that route. Last word, Frank.
So with what Natalie says, I was thinking there was one exception in the Bible where Pontius Pilate did not want to get involved in the religious squabbles, but then he did get involved and then all of the power. So this has been going on for a very long time.
I mean, I think if you read the Old Testament, you're seeing time and time again, God did not want a temple to be built. God wanted God's people to be faithful. When they said, we want a king, we want to be like all the other nations, we want to be a God's people, kingdom. God said, I don't want to give you a king. No, we want a king. And God said to Samuel, give them what they want. Let them get. And then you see time and again, it works, it doesn't work. It works, it doesn't work. It works, it doesn't work. And ultimately, it doesn't work. Okay, next week. What I'm hoping to have ready for you is a survey of this new education curriculum for the state of Texas. It is, whoa, hey, whoa, whoa. It is called Bluebonnet. And I've downloaded 90 PDF files of curriculum K through 5, multiple units from each of those grades. And I'm going to survey through them and pull out for you various things that I think are relevant to our conversations. And some other research that I uncovered for myself this last week. It's all public information. And I want to tie into that a little bit next week, as well as, again, new information to me that I've learned about education in the state of Oklahoma and what Christian nationalism looks like through the weaponization of the education process. I want you to tie back to what we read or I read you in Gestalt, that even in the 1800s, we see in 1900s, we see that education, whether on Sunday mornings or in the public school, becomes the tool to accomplish Americanization. And even still, the tool still being wielded today to accomplish these Christian nationalist goals. And let's explore a little bit more about that next week. Would someone be so kind as to close us in prayer? Thank you, Carla.
God of justice and mercy, we have listened and spoken today about the challenging needs. Help us carry your clarity into the world neither afraid nor overwhelmed, but strengthened by your promise that your justice will flow ceaselessly. Guard us against temptations of power and division. Let your truth continually reshape us into faithful witnesses who reflect your love and justice clearly in all we do. Send us forth in humility and hope.
Amen. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Marie.